In a world still obsessed with power plays and old alliances, a new force is quietly reshaping the game. Enter Ibrahim Traoré, not your typical African leader kowtowing to Western whims, but a man who flips the script with a defiant smile and a plan that sends shockwaves across geopolitical charts. While the West busies itself with outdated narratives of aid and development, Traoré stands as a stark reminder. Africa is no longer the silent spectator of its own destiny. It's the main player, rewriting the rules and rewriting them fast. No more handouts, no more playing the role of a passive victim. Traoré embodies a self-reliance that sends shivers down the spine of every old guard policymaker from Washington to Brussels. Let's be honest. The West's fear of self-reliant African leaders isn't about concern for human rights or democracy. It's about control, because when a leader like Traoré says, "We'll chart our own course," it echoes like a battle cry that challenges decades of paternalistic interference. They're not afraid of Africa rising, one might say. They're terrified of Africa standing tall without a leash. And standing tall is exactly what Traoré intends. His bold stance is a slap in the face to those still clinging to their outdated power fantasies. A reminder that the 21st century story isn't written in the corridors of the West alone. This isn't just politics. It's a seismic shift in global power dynamics. The West's usual playbook, threats, sanctions, and a steady drumbeat of concern disguised as diplomacy. But Traoré, he's rewriting that playbook with courage and conviction. Remember this line: "You don't negotiate with a leader who refuses to be bought or bullied." It's not just a slogan, it's a manifesto, a new standard for leadership on a continent historically defined by foreign puppeteers. As we dive deeper into Traoré's vision and the West's reaction, buckle up. This isn't your average geopolitical drama. This is the dawn of a fearless Africa, demanding respect on its own terms. In the polished boardrooms of the West, where power wears a tailored suit and influence is measured by cocktail parties attended, a very particular fear has taken root: the rise of self-reliant leaders like Ibrahim Traoré. These are not your run-of-the-mill politicians who nod politely and sign what's put in front of them. No, Traoré's model is a direct challenge to decades of comfortable dominance by Western powers, a threat to their cozy hegemony dressed up as global order. Why the panic, you ask? It's simple. For too long, the West has enjoyed a monopoly on influence in Africa, a continent rich in resources, but often portrayed as perpetually dependent, unstable, or in need of guidance. Enter Traoré, a leader who doesn't just talk about independence, but acts on it. He's saying loudly and clearly, "We don't need your handouts, your strings attached, or your moral lectures." And this, my friends, is what sends shivers down the spines of Western strategists. Historically, Western powers have thrived on a system of indirect control: financial aid, trade agreements skewed in their favor, political pressure, and media narratives that paint self-reliant leaders as dangerous or uncooperative. The moment someone like Traoré refuses to play the game, the usual arsenal is deployed: whispers of instability, accusations of authoritarianism, or the classic "we're just trying to help" disguise for covert interventions. But Traoré flips the script. He's not just resisting external pressure, he's building an alternative model, investing in local economies, prioritizing African solutions to African problems, and promoting regional cooperation that bypasses old colonial ties. His approach threatens to unravel a century-old script where Africa's fate was decided in distant capitals, not in African streets. Let's get real. The West fears what it can't control. And a self-reliant Africa led by figures like Traoré means an unpredictable future, one where power dynamics shift and the old rules no longer apply. It's no wonder Western media often paints Traoré with the brush of a radical or populist. It's a convenient narrative to delegitimize leaders who dare to break the chains. Here's a viral soundbite for you. When you refuse to dance to their tune, they call you the disruptor. But really, you're just rewriting the music. Behind the scenes, this fear manifests in economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and sometimes even support for rival factions or opposition groups. The West playbook is well-worn: destabilize, distract, and then reclaim influence under the guise of restoring order. But Traoré isn't just playing defense. He's redefining what leadership looks like in a post-colonial world. His boldness forces a reckoning, not just for Africa, but for a global system built on unequal power relations. The stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't just a story about one man or one continent. It's a battle for the future of sovereignty and dignity in a world still grappling with the ghosts of imperialism. And for those still wondering why the West reacts with such alarm every time Traoré speaks, remember this: true power isn't about how loudly you shout, but how stubbornly you refuse to be silenced. If history has taught us anything, it's that the West's so-called generosity towards Africa has often been a Trojan horse, wrapped in promises, but loaded with strings, traps, and the kind of fine print that would make any lawyer weep. Ibrahim Traoré's rise is not just a political shift. It's a tectonic upheaval that cracks open the myth of Western benevolence and exposes the ugly truth: that aid has been less about helping Africa and more about keeping it under thumb. The old narrative goes something like this: Africa is a continent of endless problems, waiting for Western saviors to rescue it from chaos. This paternalistic fairy tale has powered countless speeches, summits, and most importantly, pockets. But Traoré's brand of self-reliance, it's a spoiler alert, and the West hates spoilers. Let's be brutally honest. Aid has often acted like a leash. While Western powers parade as philanthropic angels, what they really do is put shackles on African economies. Debt traps, conditional loans, and trade policies that favor Western corporations are the real gifts. And Traoré? He's telling the world that Africa is done playing the victim. It's time to be the architect of its own destiny. The West's generosity is as real as a unicorn, magical in stories but nowhere to be seen in reality. This shift threatens the cozy comfort zones of Western elites who have long enjoyed Africa's resources and cheap labor under the guise of development. Traoré's model flips the script: invest in local industries, strengthen regional trade, and above all, refuse to bow to external pressures that undermine sovereignty. And here's the kicker: this isn't just about economics, it's about pride and dignity. For too long, Africa's leaders have been told to play by rules written elsewhere. Traoré throws down a gauntlet declaring, "We will no longer take orders from those who view us as charity cases." Self-reliance is the new rebellion, and Traoré is the unexpected revolutionary. Western media, predictably, tries to paint this movement as reckless or naive. But beneath the smokescreens and fear-mongering is a powerful truth. True freedom can't be bought with foreign aid or dictated by foreign interests. It's earned through resilience, innovation, and, crucially, sovereignty. In practical terms, Traoré is pioneering policies that prioritize agricultural independence, technological innovation, and regional cooperation over reliance on fickle global markets or Western handouts. This is no naive dream. It's a blueprint for survival in a world that still tries to marginalize African voices. Africa's independence isn't a threat, it's an overdue reckoning. So what does the West do when faced with a leader who refuses to dance to their tune? They try to discredit, isolate, or even destabilize. But Traoré's growing support among African youth and regional allies shows a shift too big to ignore. This is a movement rooted in pride, not pity. As viewers, we must ask ourselves, when the West talks about helping Africa, whose interests are truly being served? Traoré's bold stance forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, control, and the future of a continent too long shackled by old colonial legacies. When Africa stands up for itself, the world watches, sometimes in awe, sometimes in panic. As Ibrahim Traoré steps onto the world stage with his vision of an Africa unchained, the West's reaction is nothing short of panic. But let's be honest, this isn't just about geopolitics. It's a classic case of the old empire playing defense against a new narrative that refuses to fit their tired script. Traoré isn't just a leader, he's a living, breathing headache for the West global playbook. Why? Because his model challenges everything they've built for decades. You see, for the West, the concept of African self-reliance is like a red rag to a bull they desperately want to distract with foreign aid, trade deals wrapped in strings, and glossy speeches about partnerships. Viral line: when your empire's greatest fear is a continent that learns to stand on its own 2 feet, you know the real threat isn't guns or tanks, it's ideas. From Washington to Brussels, the subtle but unmistakable message is clear. Don't encourage this dangerous self-determination. Because if African nations start turning inward, building industries, securing their own resources, and writing their own rules, their leverage over the continent slips through their fingers like sand. And this is where the irony is thick enough to cut with a knife. The West preaches democracy and freedom, yet punishes any leader who dares prioritize sovereignty over subservience. Traoré's refusal to bow to external pressures is a direct slap in the face to decades of neocolonial tactics disguised as diplomacy. Sharp jab: the West's version of democracy is like a leash dressed up as a golden chain. It shines, but it still keeps you on a tight hold. But it's not just about politics. Traoré's model carries an economic blueprint that's rewriting the narrative of dependency. No longer will Africa be the passive recipient of handouts and loans that come with invisible shackles. Instead, Traoré pushes for homegrown industries, regional cooperation, and control over natural resources. A recipe that terrifies the old powers who feasted on Africa's wealth without sharing the pie fairly. Catchy line: if Africa is the world's supermarket, Traoré's saying it's time to stop being the customer and start owning the store. Predictably, this new paradigm triggers a backlash cloaked in concern over governance and stability. But behind these buzzwords lies fear. Fear that a self-reliant Africa will expose the cracks in the West's grand narrative of benevolent leadership. Traoré's bold moves force the West to confront a paradox. The very stability they claim to champion depends on Africa's continued reliance on external powers. His push for self-reliance threatens to rewrite the power balance, not with guns, but with bold ideas and unyielding pride. So what happens next? The West will double down on its tried and failed tactics: economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and media campaigns designed to discredit. But with every attempt to silence Traoré, the man's resolve only hardens. Because here's the truth: you can't cage a revolution in a soundbite, nor can you buy loyalty when the people see a leader who fights for their future, not their past. When a leader dares to challenge the global status quo, expect the establishment's knives to come out, and not just metaphorically. Ibrahim Traoré's bold push for African self-reliance has triggered a backlash from Western powers that feels less like diplomacy and more like economic warfare on steroids. It's as if Traoré decided to play chess while the West stubbornly insists on checkers, hoping the rules will bend back in their favor. Spoiler alert, they won't. The first weapon in the Western arsenal is the classic economic stranglehold. Forget fair competition. This is a game of leverage and coercion. Aid packages, once sold as generous support, come shackled with invisible chains, strings that tighten every time Traoré steps further out of line. Aid freezes, trade restrictions, and targeted sanctions are their bread and butter. The West's playbook is clear. Keep Africa dependent so the continent's leaders are too busy looking over their shoulders to think about self-reliance. Yet Traoré's vision threatens that very dependency. He champions local industry, regional trade, and agricultural independence. Concepts as alien to Western interests as an honest press conference from a politician. So naturally, the Western response is not dialogue but disruption. Economic pressure becomes the weapon of choice, wielded to make examples out of those who dare to dream differently. But economic warfare is only half the story. The media, the so-called Fourth Estate, joins the fray, not as impartial observers, but as active combatants. Headlines scream about authoritarianism and instability, repackaging Traoré's policies as threats to democracy rather than the brave reshaping of Africa's future. The narrative is weaponized, turning legitimate governance into villainy. Democracy becomes a convenient buzzword, selectively applied where it serves Western agendas. This media blitzkrieg is both predictable and insidious. It thrives on stereotypes and old narratives, painting Africa as a continent of chaos unless Western guidance is enforced. But Traoré's refusal to play the role of a compliant puppet shatters this illusion, and suddenly he's labeled a dangerous populist or worse. The irony? The West's loudest defenders of freedom are the first to brand any real independence as rebellion. In truth, this backlash reveals a deep insecurity. The West fears losing its grip not just on resources, but on the story itself. Because controlling the narrative means controlling power. And Traoré's rise threatens to rewrite the script, exposing the hypocrisy and self-interest behind centuries of benevolence. To quote a sharp observer, when you control the economy and the media, you don't just shape reality and you own it. Traoré's challenge is not just economic, it's existential. And make no mistake, this isn't just some geopolitical game of chess. It's a battle for the soul of a continent, with far-reaching consequences beyond borders. The West's economic sanctions and media smear campaigns are less about protecting democracy and more about protecting old privileges. In this clash, Traoré emerges not as a naive idealist, but a formidable strategist, navigating the storm with a mix of resilience and cunning. His vision exposes the fragility of Western dominance and the hypocrisy of democratic rhetoric. It forces us to ask, who really fears democracy? Those who deny it to others or those who fear losing control? Economic aid with strings attached? That's not generosity, that's modern-day economic colonialism, gift-wrapped with a bill. The Western media's favorite pastime, turning leaders who dare to act into villains, then pretending they're champions of freedom. Traoré's biggest crime? Refusing to star in the West's never-ending drama of Africa needs saving. When the narrative is controlled, truth becomes a casualty, and Africa's self-reliance is the enemy. Sanctions and smear campaigns, the West's toolkit for teaching lessons to leaders who don't toe the line. In the West's eyes, true independence isn't a right, it's a threat. When the world expected Ibrahim Traoré to fold under the weight of Western pressure, he did what only a self-reliant leader could do. He doubled down. In a geopolitical chess game where pawns are sacrificed without a second thought, Traoré played the Grandmaster's move, a strategy so cunning it left the West scrambling for a playbook that simply didn't exist. First, let's get one thing straight. Traoré's power isn't rooted in mere defiance. It's forged from a deeply strategic approach that blends diplomacy, economic resilience, and a narrative that resonates with the very soul of Africa's long-awaited renaissance. It's easy to mock or dismiss him as a military strongman, but to do so misses the point entirely. Traoré is rewriting the rules of engagement. The West, used to puppeteering from behind the curtain, suddenly finds itself looking at a stage where the lead actor refuses to follow the script. Traoré's first playbook card is economic self-reliance. In a continent too often labeled aid-dependent, Traoré champions local industries, agricultural reforms, and regional trade pacts designed to minimize reliance on Western loans and generous grants. Grants that often come with invisible shackles. By focusing on internal growth, he's essentially telling the West, you don't own us. We're not your charity case. This is no small feat. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank have long dictated policy frameworks across Africa, often demanding austerity in exchange for financial lifelines. Traoré's rejection of this model isn't just political posturing, it's a bold economic manifesto. As he puts it, a leader who needs no one's permission to feed his people has already won half the battle. The second stroke of genius is diplomatic jujitsu. When Western powers hurl accusations, impose sanctions, or issue veiled threats, Traoré flips the script with a mix of calculated defiance and savvy alliances. Rather than isolating himself, he reaches out to China, Russia, and regional neighbors, crafting partnerships that dilute Western influence. This strategy doesn't just balance power, it creates a new geopolitical dance floor where old players must adjust their steps or get left behind. Traoré's approach has even inspired other African leaders who quietly nod in approval while the West scrambles to write urgent how-to manuals for engaging a new generation of leaders who refuse to bow. Perhaps the sharpest blade in Traoré's arsenal is his command over the narrative. The West has spent decades shaping Africa's story, often reducing it to cliches of chaos, corruption, and dependency. Traoré's rise flips this narrative upside down. Through powerful speeches, savvy use of social media, and symbolic acts of sovereignty, he paints a portrait of Africa as a continent on the rise, a force of self-determination that refuses to be patronized. His words resonate because they tap into a collective yearning, the desire for dignity, respect, and autonomy. As one viral phrase among supporters goes, Africa doesn't need a seat at the table. Africa builds its own table. What really terrifies the West is not Traoré's rhetoric or military strength. It's the idea that a leader can thrive without Western validation. It's the prospect of a continent that no longer begs but bargains, that no longer waits but leads. Traoré's strategy exposes the fragile underbelly of Western dominance. It's not invincible, it's contingent on compliant partners. And so the West reacts with a mix of confusion, frustration, and sometimes desperation. But Traoré's masterstroke is to remain unshaken, proving that real power lies not in guns or money alone, but in the will to be independent and the courage to forge a new path. When the West expects you to kneel, stand tall enough to cast a shadow they can't ignore. Economic aid with strings attached is just a leash disguised as a gift. Traoré cut that leash. In a world of puppets, Traoré refuses to dance. Power isn't given, it's taken by those who build their own table. The West fears not a leader who threatens with guns, but one who threatens with independence. As the dust settles on the old world order, Ibrahim Traoré stands not just as a leader of a nation, but as a herald of a new Africa, an Africa that refuses to be boxed into the tired scripts of dependency and fear. His vision is crystal clear, a continent fueled by self-reliance, sovereignty, and a refusal to bow to external pressure disguised as aid or partnership. This is no longer a mere political slogan. It is a seismic shift in the global power play. The West, with its cocktail of condescension and covert manipulation, has always preferred Africa as the perennial supplicant, the child needing guidance, the market to be exploited, the resource pool to be tapped. Traoré's unapologetic demand for respect and equality is like a wrench thrown into the finely tuned machinery of neocolonial influence. His model, self-sufficiency powered by indigenous innovation, strategic alliances with other rising powers, and a refusal to trade dignity for dollars. But let's be clear, this is not some utopian fantasy. It's a roadmap fraught with challenges, from entrenched corruption to infrastructural deficits, and yes, from external actors who prefer puppets to partners. Yet in the face of this, Traoré's Africa dares to dream and act. As he puts it, we are not here to ask permission for our destiny, we are here to claim it. And isn't that the real fear? Not that Africa rises, but that it rises on its own terms. Terms the West cannot control. Terms that unsettle the global status quo. The old scripts of aid dependency and democracy promotion sound increasingly hollow when confronted with the thunderous reality of African agency. When the lion roars in its own language, the jackals tremble in confusion. Traoré's message is a wake-up call, not just to Africa, but to the entire world. The era of handouts and hollow diplomacy is over. In its place is a bold, unapologetic demand for a seat at the table, built on merit, strength, and vision. So what does this mean for you, the viewer watching this unfold? It means recognizing the power of narratives. For decades, the story of Africa has been written by outsiders. Today, it's time to listen to the voices rising from within. Voices like Traoré's that challenge, provoke, and inspire. Traoré's Africa is not asking to be saved. It is declaring it will save itself. And in doing so, it demands a fundamental rethink of how the world engages with a continent that refuses to be a footnote in anyone else's story. If this vision resonates with you, if you believe in a world where dignity and self-determination are not just buzzwords, but lived realities, then this conversation doesn't end here. Share this video, spark debate, question the narratives you've been told. The power of change begins with awareness and spreads through dialogue. Stand with those who dare to disrupt the old order, because when the next chapter of history is written, you want to be able to say, I was there when the lion roared.